Hello, hello, hello. It says we're live. I will give it just a minute here to make sure that I see it on my end. Trying to see usually to show me here how many people are watching, but it's not connected to that yet. So we'll have to take a look here. But I do see people already in the chat. So if you would, let us know if you can hear us and see us and all that. Okay. And we'll give it just a second for the stream to catch up. We're on a bit of a delay. Sweet. I see us on the screen, which is great. And like I was telling you, Brian, I think we have 660 people registered for this call, which is super exciting.
Cool.
Lots of people in the chat already. Charlie, Sharon, Tim, appreciate y'all being here. Laura, good to see you. Excellent. They can hear us. Great news, man. StreamYard makes it so much easier. I was trying to do all this like for the last couple of years in OBS, and it is just like trying to run a spaceship while also trying to talk to people, and it is very difficult.
Yeah, I've heard everybody I've heard using StreamYard likes it, it seems like.
Yeah, much easier. And I let's see, I put out the word everywhere. I scheduled a bunch of posts, so hopefully this is going out to everybody. We'll vamp for a second here and dive in. I know we got a lot of stuff to cover here, so I don't want to spend too much time dillying and dallying. I will say, I guess just starting us off, I want to remind everybody that this is kind of part one of a 5-part series. So today we're going to be talking about time to first byte, but we have lots more goodies coming up in the future. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we get towards the end of this call. So yeah, we're going to jump into TTFB today, kind of where everything starts. If anybody has questions, if you'll drop those in there with the hashtag Q so I can quickly look through all of those and find them. We're going to try to save a little bit of time for questions and answers at the end of this call, although I think we got 20 slides to get through, so we'll see. It might just be the biggest, like if I see a question come across 10 times, I'll try to cover that, but we might not have tons of time for that.
And people know that I like to ramble if they've watched previous videos, so I guess passionate, I guess is what you could say maybe.
Well, you're very knowledgeable. You have a lot to say, so we already got a question. What are the other parts? So next month we're going to be talking about largest contentful paint. So we got like I said, 5 of these going. A couple of them are going to be like on a single metric, and then we have some towards the end where we're combining some where it just makes sense to combine a few together. So Brian's done so much work on this. I just want to give him a huge shout out for organizing a ton of this. Obviously putting all the information together. I know nothing, so anything you learned today will be from Brian. And huge shout out to you and to Perfmatters for putting all this together. So very exciting on that. If you would drop a like on the stream, I would appreciate that. That will hopefully help get it out to more people. We got 54 people watching right now. And then lastly, I guess Brian's got a bunch of he's put together slides for all this with a lot of good information on it. He's gonna send me those slides after this call is over. I'm gonna put together a post on our website that will have a link to those, so you can download all this information. So that'll save you from taking notes or screenshots or whatever during this call. If you'd like, you'll be able to get access to all that before we're over. So,
and I did try to put links in the slides to like the plugins, even the GT metrics reports, stuff like that. So like if you have the slides in the PDF, you should be able to like click into some of the stuff easily too.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get this show on the road. So the idea behind this series, I reached out to Brian a month or two back and told him, like every time I run a Lighthouse report or something and it tells me, hey, this metric's wrong or this metric's wrong, I have to go do a bunch of research and like sometimes just write Brian and say, hey, this one thing's doing bad. What should I look at? It's trying to remember, like if it's time to first byte, this is what you need to do. If it's LCP, this is what you need to do. And I said, it'd be great to do a webinar on what are all these things, like what causes issues with them or what is most likely to cause issues with them. And if we see issues with this, where should we look first? What kinds of things should we do to remedy this? It's a bigger question than one webinar can handle. So we've decided to split this out into 5 parts. So this is part 1, where we're going to be covering time to first byte. And like I said, this is a huge shout out to Brian for doing this and to Perfmatters for, I guess, sponsoring and putting this on for us. I got my Perfmatters hat here to support. I'm a huge fan, so we're not going to try to make this a commercial for Perfmatters. I think Brian would be very uncomfortable if I tried to do that. But I love the product, and I'm very appreciative that he is one of the co-founders of that and is here to actually teach us about all kinds of things performance related. There are lots of other plugins out there that don't spend the time on the education like this, and I really appreciate it. So before we jump into the slides, I just want to give you a second, Brian, to kind of introduce yourself for anybody who doesn't know you already, maybe a little bit of background and where Perfmatters started up, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm the co-founder of Forge Media. I run it with my brother, just the two of us. And I've been doing WordPress since 2008. That's when I launched my first blog. And over the years, I just really dove into the performance aspects of it. I found it really interesting. I started working at KeyCDN, which is a content delivery network, and then I moved to more focused on WordPress at Kinsta, which is a managed WordPress hosting provider. And so just every job I've taken kind of has inched me closer and closer to just doing really hardcore performance related things. We kind of launched a Perfmatters plugin while I was at Kinsta in the evenings, just because I kept seeing people ask for little tweaks here and there and tickets. And so I asked my brother, like, can you just put something together and I'll just like share this zip for free with people. So it kind of started out as that, like a hobby, and then morphed into like, what if we sell it? And then we started getting support tickets from the sales, and then it kind of just morphed from there. And I decided to step away from Kinsta at one point, and then we just decided to do this full time. So it's kind of.
And we're very appreciative that you did. My sites are a lot faster for it.
And this presentation won't even really be using Perfmatters. So this is, like you said, I like to educate anything core web vitals I find really interesting. And like, obviously, TTFB is really the first foundational part of performance. So like, you can't really have a great website without fixing this issue. So.
Absolutely. See, I told you I'd make them uncomfortable by making it a commercial for Perfmatters.
We'll definitely dive into Perfmatters in the future videos, though, for sure.
For sure. All right. Well, then I'm going to share your screen and we'll let you take it away from here. And I'll try to interject and give you a breather every now and then.
Cool. Let's see here. So let's go into the first one. So TTFB Defined. And I tried to dumb this down, all this stuff, as much as possible. Some of this stuff, you can only dumb it down so much, I guess you could say. But time to first byte, so is a metric that measures the time taken to establish a connection to your server and then receive the first byte of page data back. So the way I like to visualize it is the GT metrics speed thing. I think that's the easiest way to kind of understand it. And you can see that TTF bar happens first, then you have FCP, then you have LCP, then you have fully loaded time. So think of it left to right is how I like to think of it. TTFB is the thing that happens first. And that really happens before anything visually on the website happens. So it's like the connection to the server part of stuff. And you'll probably also see it referred to as server response time. You probably see that warning sometimes in page speed insights. That's server response time isn't technically TTFB, but it's close as possible. And like, I just refer to them as the same thing at this point. If you're fixing TTFB, you're fixing server response time back and forth. So this is classified as a notable metric. It's not actually an official core web vitals metric. So some people misunderstand page speed insights as far as thinking, they think like FCP, TTFB, total blocking time, TBT. They think all of these are core web vitals metrics. That's actually not true. Only the top three are actually what you're passing or failing on. So LCP, INP, and CLS. Those are the three core web vitals metrics. That's where you're going to get the pass or the fail at the top. The other things actually don't matter at all, other than that they impact how these perform. So that's why we're going to call it a notable metric, because it has a direct impact on LCP, FCP, etc.
Yeah, just because we're not going to get pass or failed on this doesn't mean it doesn't matter for sure. Yeah.
And if you don't fix TTFB, I guarantee you're going to struggle with your LCP and your FCP. So why is it important? Because it has a huge impact on these, and it also impacts perceived performance, which I never see a lot of people talking about this, but how perceived performance is how fast your site feels. So you don't want to always just go for the scores because sometimes you can over optimize and then your site actually feels slower. So like you always want to still load time, going back old school to just, you know, how fast does your site load? How many seconds? Like it's still good to actually take a look at that stuff too, not just looking at these core web vitals metrics. So yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you're kind of teaching to the test sometimes, you know, like my kids have to do all this, all these, you know, tests every year. And it's like the teachers teach to the test, but the test was invented to make sure they know the things, right? So
exactly, yeah.
All this core web vital stuff exists so that our sites are faster, right? So if we don't actually test, does my site load on my screen quickly? You know, that's what it's all about.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes it feels like Google's punishing us, but really they're actually trying to help us, saying if you fix these things, your site should actually end up being faster at the end. So, but I do agree that it does feel like Google punishes us a lot with these things, and they're very strict. So they want things to be really fast. So what is a good TTFB? According to Google, you want to have your TTFB under 800 milliseconds. So, and if anyone doesn't know, 1,000 milliseconds is a second, so kind of gives you a rough ballpark there. If you're using Lighthouse and Chrome DevTools, they're looking at 600 milliseconds. So if you're running a speed test from your browser, Chrome DevTools, they're looking at 600 milliseconds, but the actual recommended is 800 milliseconds. So it depends on what you're using, PageSpeed Insights versus Lighthouse in your browser. But again, I always just say aim for 300 milliseconds. I don't care about any of those other metrics. I just say aim for 300, and as close as you can get to that or under, like that's kind of what you want, the ballpark. And the reason is you can expect spikes, areas of your site not cached, which we'll dive into, other things like you're just not going to get everything probably perfect. So you want to account for like spikes here and there, variations and stuff like that happening. So hopefully if you aim for 300, you can eventually, you know, get a majority of that stuff into the 800, which is what Core Web Vitals is looking at. Okay, this slide is probably the most technical looking slide in the present.
Looks like we got a bit of freezing here, and I don't know if it's me or Brian.
I'll hold off here for a second.
I think you're back now. So I'm not sure if it was me or you, but one of us froze up there for a second. But you had just moved over to this slide. I think we're good now.
I think I might be freezing here again. Am I good?
Yep, it went again, but hopefully we're okay now. No, looks like we're frozen up again. So let's see here what we can do about that from my end. I'm going to take your slides off the screen for a second, and we'll see if that helps. All right, I'm seeing that I'm coming in clear, but Brian is the one that's freezing up. So apologize for that, y'all. Give us just a second here while we try to get it back up and running.
Let me try changing my resolution here, see if that does anything.
Okay, perfect. Time to first freeze. It looks like that took 13 minutes and 40 seconds there, John. So we're just slightly above the 800 milliseconds. All right, let's see if we can get you added back here. And of course, it's not showing your screen again, so I might have to... Yeah, when I'm adding it to the screen, it's not actually coming up for some reason. I'm going to, Brian, if you can hear me okay, it does look like you're a little little fuzzy there. I'm going to get rid of your screen sharing for a second. And so you're going to have to press that present button again. That kicks you from the studio. We don't want that. Okay. Now you might be able to do it again. Okay. And hopefully we can get back up and running. All right. There we go. Looks like we're back up and running here. So apologies, y'all, for that. We'll try to knock that off.
Let's see if that holds up. Okay, so yeah, this is the most crazy looking graph or image that will be in the presentation. So you can kind of ignore some of this stuff, but I wanted to include it because I think it gives a good representation of what's happening. So like what makes up TTFB. So you can break it up into different parts. So you can break it up into the connection, redirects happening, like 301 redirects from like HTTP to HTTPS, or a 301 for like from your SEO plugin, stuff like that. The DNS lookup, SSL, TLS connections, and then the cache itself. So that kind of, if you go through, that's kind of what makes up TTFB. And then once TTFB is there, then that's when the paint starts, FCP, LCP, all that stuff happens after. So it's good to think of, there are things that are inside, I guess you could say, of TTFB that are also impacting it as well. So
it's amazing that all of that happens in 800 milliseconds anyways.
Yeah, there is a lot of stuff going on under the hood. So that's why I like to include this, because yeah, there's, for more technical folks, they might find this interesting. I did. So well, let's go to the next one here. How to measure TTFB. So there's a number of different tools you can use. My personal favorites are PageSpeed Insights, of course, GTmetrix. Speed Vitals is doing some really cool stuff. Check that one out if you haven't heard of that one. And then Debugbear is my new favorite that I've been using. They have a lot of cool things as far as like showing like fetch and preload tags on assets, and lots of more other things we'll dive into that one definitely in other videos. And then of course you can use Chrome DevTools and Lighthouse in the browser. But PageSpeed Insights and GTmetrix are great for if you want just simple. I always recommend testing at least 3 times when you're testing TTFB because of cache and things we'll go into here. But you never want to really take that first test ever as concrete data. You want to just kind of get the average and make sure everything is hitting cache here too. But lots of influences, network latency, cache, all that stuff.
Yeah, I notice a lot of times when I'm doing this testing, I'll make a change, change something in Perfmatters or whatever it may be that I'm trying to improve scores. And I go run the test again. It's like, oh, I need to clear out the cache. I need to probably run it a couple more times. And you have to have a little bit of patience when you're doing that, because you're right. One score, it's not going to be the same if you run it 3 times in a row. You're going to get a little bit different each time.
Yeah. And if you see a big spike on that first one and then the next 2 are very similar, it's probably like a cache thing that like it just wasn't cached again or something. But again, yeah, always run multiple tests and see until you kind of get it pinging at an average, and then kind of look at that data. So the warnings you want to look at is reduce initial server response time. That's kind of really referring to TTFB. And if you're good to go, you'll see like initial server response time was short and it kind of be grayed out, like it won't be flagging red. That means you're good. The next thing is PageSpeed Insights and real user data. So this is something I wanted to mention because I see a lot of people doing this wrong. The data at the top of PageSpeed Insights, so what's in this graph right here, this is the top. That's the real user data. The stuff at the bottom, where it's flagging you for what you need to fix, that's the lab data. And the lab data is like live data. That's what's showing on the site right now. Real user data is actually collected over the last 28 days. Like as Google's crawling it, things are happening. And that's where Core Web Vitals is actually looking at. So the pass or fail is happening on data collected over time. It's not happening on the live data from the bottom. So it's just important to remember that this stuff at the top's always delayed. So you want to use the lab data at the bottom to be like, okay, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm fixing. It's getting better. It's getting better. But you're probably going to have to wait for that top data to actually reflect this. So
yeah, and you also have to have enough visits to your website too. If you don't have enough traffic to your website, you might not even see the live data. But that is something I've run into with customers. Like, well, we did these things, but it's still showing I'm failing. Well, we're gonna have to wait, a month to see those passing scores on there. The lab data will show us as we're making changes in real time what's going on, but you're not going to see those pass fail things at the top of the screen change that quickly.
Yeah. Even on our Forge Media Agency site, we don't get a lot of traffic to that because it's just like a one page.
Sure.
Here's our plugins, and that's kind of like we don't even get enough traffic. So like you said, we don't have actually any real user data for that website because it's just there's not enough traffic.
And there was a question here a second ago about when we were talking about the 800, 600, you're shooting for 300 milliseconds on that. Vanessa had asked on the TTFB what type of connection that's being measured on. I'd love for you to answer that here while we're kind of talking about this, because I think that works into why we're actually seeing this like live user data for the real scores versus the lab scores.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're measuring it on a throttled, I think it's 4G connection. So like they're taking a phone and slowing the phone down, and that's what they're measuring it on, basically. So that's why I feel like sometimes it feels like Google's punishing you because they're looking at mobile and slower mobile. Now, you can look at the desktop stuff too, where they're measuring on a faster connection, but I think at this point, everyone would probably agree that mobile is the only thing that everyone's struggling with.
Right.
Most of the time, if you optimize mobile, desktop is completely fine at this point. And 99% of our tickets that we work on with Perfmatters, nobody has ever asked about how do I optimize the desktop.
Right.
So everyone's focused on mobile these days. And that's what Google's indexing now too, is mobile first. So, and they're testing on a slower throttled 4G connection. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and I think why I wanted to kind of ask that question here too is like the lab data that you're seeing down here as you're changing things is great as you debug and try to fix issues and all that. But the reason they're using the aggregate score here over the past month or whatever it is because you have people visiting your website with all kinds of different connections and different devices and all that. And that's why they're trying to simulate that by actually testing it with a throttled device. That way,
that's a good point.
It's more real world, right? Because we're all nerds with real fast connections, or we freak out, and the rest of the world might be on a train somewhere, bouncing from tower to tower as they try to load your website. So, something to take into account.
Exactly. Yep. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing on this is important to remember is there's this small little tab, top right there with the blue arrow. It says this URL or origin. This URL is measuring, is showing data on the page that you're testing. If that's grayed out, which is in this screenshot that I happen to choose, it means there's only data for the origin or your entire site averages. So there's actually not enough real user data for it to say this URL pass or fails. But we looked at your entire site for the origin, and that did actually pass or fail, which in this one passed. So it's important to look at that because sometimes you might want to toggle between this URL or origin because you might be testing the wrong thing or looking at the wrong thing too. So I wish they made that bigger and more apparent there because I see a lot of people sometimes on the wrong one. Okay, next one. Beware of redirects, DNS, and TLS. I don't want to go into this too deep because some of this you can't fix either too much. But when testing TTFB, it's important to remember all these different parts like we went over earlier. DNS lookup time, SSL, TLS, waiting. GT metrics is the best way to kind of visualize this again. If you hover over the initial HTML request, you can see how they break that down. Like the DNS took this long, SSL, and see kind of and with their colors there. So you can kind of see how long all that stuff took. But again, some of this is kind of hard to tweak, but we'll go into that a little bit too later.
Okay.
This is one example though that I always use because I feel like it visualizes it the best is with redirects. So imagine you're redirecting from HTTP to HTTPS. That redirect actually has a performance cost. And so that's what I did here in this test that we can see. Just going from HTTP to HTTPS, it added an additional 123 milliseconds. So it didn't quite double the time there from that 256, but it added another 50% basically to the time and that's kind of related to the whole TTFB. So Redirects do have a big performance cost. So, if you don't have to redirect something, you don't want to. But also remember that Google is probably indexing your HTTPS version. So when people are clicking through Google, clicking into your site, hopefully they're just going straight to that HTTPS version. But it's also important. I see a lot of people speed testing me and sending me speed tests of not using the full URL, like in GTmetrix. And then they actually see this, which is not a good representation probably of what real users are hitting. Or they think it's actually worse than it actually is. So make sure you're testing the final URL, like the HTTPS version, when you're speed testing things.
So when you put all that, like if I was to test the admin bar, I shouldn't just type theadminbar.com. I should type https://
Correct.
Okay. Interesting.
And there's a few tools which I think append HTTPS now onto it, but GTmetrix is not one of those, which is probably good because then you can see this happening too. It's good to understand what's happening. But yeah, when you're speed testing, always use the final URL, assuming that's what will be indexed. Okay, so hosting. So out of anything that impacts TTFB, this is one of the biggest things. Even Google in their doc, which I have a link to, you can click into that later and read it. Even they say, first thing, hosting. That's word for word from them. So for hosts, I recommend, I always recommend managed WordPress hosting. It just makes things easier. Usually higher quality hosting will have faster servers, better uptime, more resources. I just don't recommend ever using shared hosts if you don't have to. So the hosts I like working with, recommend Kinsta. Now, I used to work at Kinsta, so a little biased, but I do have all my sites there as well. Big Scoots, I really like what they're doing. And we're actually a partner with them with our Perfmatters plugin. So they're doing some great stuff with Cloudflare. So definitely check them out. Rocket.net is another great one. It's doing stuff with Cloudflare as well. InstaWP Live. So I think, Kyle, you're a fan of InstaWP. I love InstaWP. We're a customer. I use them all the time now for staging and just testing and screenshots. And it's just way quicker than anything else. And so they launched hosting, which is powered by Automatics Cloud, which is actually pretty darn good. And so their hosting is, I've tested it myself personally and ran speed tests, and it's actually pretty great. It's still in the initial phases of just launching, so you might not want to just move everything right away, but like definitely take a look. They do have like slightly lower prices too, so it might be a good cheaper option for if you can't go to one of these top tier hosts, like you might want to but you want to move away from a shared cheaper host, like you might want to look at InstaWP. That's what I've kind of been telling folks. And then you have Cloudways, which I think Kyle, I think you use Cloudways, right?
I do.
Yeah, so they're a good, I feel like, more hybrid approach because you can kind of choose your cloud provider like Google Cloud, Amazon. But I would actually say that there's more work involved with them too. There's more tweaking, but you do have more control too. So it's kind of more just based on your workflow.
Yeah, and I will say I've had sites on Kinsta, and it's always been what's so great about any of those managed hosts is like you just don't do anything. Like you just sign up and then everything works. And if it ever doesn't work, their support answers like this and fixes your issue, which is great. Big Scoots is newer to me. They've been a sponsor inside the newsletter, so you might have seen them the last few weeks in there. And I know Brian had some really great things to say about them. Rocket.net, the founder of that of Rocket.net, is in our group and comes on or speaks a lot inside the group. InstaWP, we've done several webinars with. Vikas is super great and really responsive to things. So definitely, I would check all those out for sure.
Yeah, and these are basically entirely based on what we see working with tickets and what Brett and I actually like working on, the hosts we like working with. So this is from daily experience over years of here's the ones that we think are doing the best job at the moment. Now, obviously, I can't include everybody, but these are the ones we really like. So these will also be a big impact as far as like those other things impacting TTFB, like DNS lookup, SSL connection. And these hosts have taken time to make sure those are as good as possible on their services. So that's why the better host, you'll probably end up fixing some of these slow DNS things, all this other stuff. So I've used this Starbucks example since I started working at way back when I was at Kinsta, is that, if you're going to buy Starbucks every week, there isn't any reason you shouldn't be like investing in managed hosting. Like, you should spend your time growing your business, not twiddling with hosting, tweaking things, uptime, fixing stuff like that. Like, invest in a managed host. It will save you money and time in the long run. I guarantee it.
I know we're going to get, we already got one in here asking about specific hosts. Obviously, Brian put together a list here of ones that he said he likes working with. We probably can't go through every host in here or disparage too many of them. But as a general rule of thumb, if it's like a shared hosting type plan, so I'll throw one out there. I'll throw somebody under the bus so you don't have to do it. Like, when I first started making websites, I was like, man, hosting for $3 a month, this is great. And I signed up for a HostGator account and threw as many websites as I possibly could on it. And that's a huge nightmare. So like Brian's saying, if you're willing to spend a little bit more, if you're okay with going to spend, I don't know how much that Starbucks drink cost you, but it was almost,
well, the HostGator is charging less than this cup of drink. That doesn't make sense. That's common sense, in my opinion. Like, they're cutting corners somewhere to make that work. So like, just always do the math in your head and think like, what am I losing here? Now, if I had to throw one, I'm not going to throw anyone on the bus. If I had to throw one that I would recommend for shared hosting, if you need to go cheap as possible, like, I would maybe say SiteGround is okay to use. We work with a lot of SiteGround clients. But again, if you're at SiteGround, like, I would encourage you to look at something like InstaWP too. They've just they've done a lot more stuff with the edge cache, which we'll go into here. So yeah, but SiteGround's not horrible either. So
excellent, perfect. There you go. We have another option in there.
Yeah, another option. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to dive into cache. So after hosting, this is a must for TTFB. And if you don't do cache, you'll never get TTFB to where it should be. So with those managed hosts that we mentioned earlier, they do caching for you. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to install a plugin. It's all done for you. That's why we recommend managed. But if you need a cache plugin, Fastest Cache, Rocket, Superpage Cache for Cloudflare, those are the three I like working with, recommend all the time. Some of those are free, some are premium. But I have an example here of, we can see here's a non-cached, and this is an identical site. Non-cached visit was TTFB was 288 milliseconds. So now if we look at the cached test, we're down to 122 milliseconds for the TTFB. So the TTFB decreased by 57.64%. But also notice how the FCP and LCP also decreased without me changing anything else other than adding cache. So you can see that's how the TTFB directly impacts everything else coming later. Also the total load time, so that perceived performance. So it literally impacts everything going forward.
I think the biggest problem here is like, it's like the running joke of like, well, did you flush your cache? Everybody has so many problems once they add caching to their website. It has all these secondary effects that can be frustrating at times as you're testing things out. So it's good to know kind of what some of these better ones are to go with, or if you're going with one of those managed hosts, not having to fool with this at all is definitely a benefit.
Yeah, no, trust me, caching is annoying. And Brett and we have this running joke kind of internally, like back when we used to do IT support, is like, did you restart your computer? Right. And like now it's like, it's cache. Cache is the problem.
Oh, I've noticed you haven't added that to the Perfmatters plugin. So
one of the reasons we haven't done that is because there's already a lot of great alternatives. And if you go with the host that we're recommending, they already have this done for you. So we're kind of in this hybrid area right now, but that's one reason we haven't added it. But yeah, there's different layers of cache, which we'll also dive into. And that's why it can be annoying sometimes, because there's so many different caching things going on. Okay, so now that you have, let's say you installed a cache plugin or you have cache already with your hosting provider, let's add distance to it. This is something people sometimes forget, is I have a site in Canada. I have a site in Germany. So it's an identical site. And I'm literally just changing the location. So the TTFB, and actually I think I have cache off here just to show it more dramatically here, the results. But TTFB Canada was 524 milliseconds. TTFB, just by switching it to Germany, was 1 second. So the TTFB increased by 90%. FCP increased 111%. LCP increased 140%. And these are all mobile tests, FYI. Forgot to put that in the slides. Everything I'm doing is on mobile. Okay. And the load time increased 140% just by changing the location. So how do you fix that? Because even if you add cache, that doesn't fix the distance problem. What we do is there's this new thing called edge cache. So you have your page cache. That's what the hosting provider does or a plugin does. To fix a distance problem, you have to add something like edge cache. And again, this is only really a problem if you're serving people across the globe. So let's say you're a local business in Dallas and you only care about people in Dallas. If your server's in Dallas and you have cache, you're probably fine. You don't care about someone in Germany hitting your site and it being slower. So this is really if you're serving clients all over the place. However, I would say most of the clients we work with care about global clients. We actually don't work with a lot of local clients. I don't know if you do, Kyle, but most people we're working with actually do care about everywhere.
Yeah, I try not to work with local clients, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, I see this come up a lot with like people who are working with like, okay, all our customers, it's a local walk-in mom and pop business. Like we only care about the people in this geographic area. Do they need a CDN for that? Right. Well, this stuff's not going to be as important if all your visitors and your server are in the same physical space. You're probably not going to have as much of a need for that as you would for the admin bar's website, which is visited by people all over the globe.
Correct. Yeah. And we'll go into that too a little bit in my bottom point there. So the way to fix the distance problem is edge cache. So like a normal CDN, that's serving up your CSS, JS, and images in different locations around the globe. That doesn't fix the TTFB problem because that's all about your HTML doc requests. Like it doesn't fix the server problem. That only fixes your assets. So edge cache is doing everything. That's like putting your site behind an entirely different server in different locations. So it does the HTML, which is the TTFB related, CSS, JS, and images. So it does everything. I like to say, think of it as a CDN on steroids, basically. So when someone hits edge cache, there's actually no request back to your original host at all. So that think of it like you have your host and then you have your edge cache, and a lot of people, as long as things are cached or not expired, like they're hitting the edge cache and not even getting to the host, which is great because there's less load time on the host. They're getting it close to their location, so it's a win-win all around. Hosting providers mentioned earlier, all of them have edge cache integrations. That's another reason why we recommend them, is because you don't have to worry about any of this. They already have that option. Some of them use different providers. Most of them use Cloudflare. Another uses Automatic Cloud to do the same thing, but all works the same. If you're using a host without this feature, you can achieve the same thing with your own free Cloudflare account and a plugin. So like Cloudflare with the APO add-on, which is just something that Cloudflare has in their options, that they charge $5 a month from that. And then you can install the free Cloudflare plugin. I recommend checking that out. I also have a blog post and stuff on our Perfmatters site, kind of about APO as well. And then another solution is Cloudflare with the free super page cache for Cloudflare plugin. So one of the developers and guys over at Big Scoots actually works on this plugin. So I do recommend this plugin. It's a great plugin. And their team knows how this works really, really well.
Can I ask you on this real quick? So
sure.
the free like official Cloudflare plugin. I see you have that on the same line here as the APO. Does that work? Is that still going to help you on just the free Cloudflare account without the automatic platform optimization add-on, or is that only really going to help if you're paying that extra $5 a month?
So the reason I say to install the Cloudflare plugin is because it handles things like they give you an option to clear the cache and stuff like that from your site. So like you really don't want to use Cloudflare without some type of plugin, you know?
Okay.
But so if you're using free Cloudflare account, like you should install a free Cloudflare plugin. But the APO is just a service in your Cloudflare account that you can enable. And they will tag on $5 extra to your Cloudflare billing, which might have been $0 before if you had just signed up for a free account.
Right. Okay.
So you could literally do everything with Edge Cache for $5 a month with Cloudflare.
Okay. But you could not pay Cloudflare that $5 and get a similar thing with the Super Page Cache plugin. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So they don't do, it's not the same, quite the same as what Cloudflare is offering, but they kind of, I don't want to say jerry rig. That's not a good term because they actually do it a really great way, but they kind of mimic APO in a different way with page speed rules on Cloudflare side.
Okay.
So that eventually the end result is about the same type of thing. So it's just another great free alternative to, and try both, and see what works best for you too. But either one of those is work great for folks. And we have a lot of clients using both those different ones. So
excellent.
And here on this last point is kind of this, it goes back to your local thing. So I actually don't usually recommend using Cloudflare if you're not going to enable Edge Cache. And the reason is because there's always been, and this is kind of controversial, but there's always been this thing where the TTFB is just plain worse with Cloudflare without Edge Cache. And it's mainly due to the overhead of their firewall and stuff like that. So I usually say only use Cloudflare if you're going to go down this Edge Cache route.
Okay.
And this would also go with those local clients. So like if you're just serving local people, you might not need a CDN at all, or it'd be better to do a traditional CDN. So it's not impacting that TTFB stuff.
Interesting.
Now, I don't go into the security stuff. I'm not a security expert. So there's other benefits from Cloudflare, obviously, for security. So you might end up wanting to add it for, maybe you're getting a DDoS attack. That Cloudflare can be a great way to stop that. So there's other reasons you might want to look at that. But as far as just performance, that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, everything's a trade-off, right? So maybe you get some security benefits and you have to eat it a little bit on the performance side or vice versa.
Yeah. The main reason I pointed out is because if there's anybody listening to this that's using free Cloudflare account without Edge Cache, you're probably hurting yourself at the moment, and you could easily speed things up if you just added the Edge Cache part. So that's the important thing.
So because when you log into a Cloudflare account, if you're not a super expert, there's a lot of options in there. So I'm wondering how many people are wondering, okay, am I using Edge caching or not? So if you're not using the APO add-on and you're not using the Super Page Cache, is it possible you're still using their Edge caching, or is that something you would definitely know that you've added on?
Let me actually just pull that up here really quick. Might as well just show it here. That might make it easier.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm just logging in here on my other screen here.
No worries. I see we got Troy in the house saying he prefers security over speed. Troy put out a bunch of great firewall rules inside the group and on his website here recently. So if you're looking for that, I'll include that link.
And again, I am not a security expert, and I use Cloudflare. We've gotten DDoS attacked a few times as well, so I can vouch for Cloudflare as far as stopping DDoS attacks.
There was some of that going around this week.
Yeah. Not a great week for some providers. So here's just my personal site, but I'm going to show you here. Can you see this?
Yep, we can see it being drug in.
Let's see here. So if you go, this is just my personal website, but if you go to speed here, optimization, you can see that there's this automatic platform for WordPress. It's just this little toggle here. I do recommend enabling this cache by device because that will enable separate mobile cache. And if you're doing anything like preloading, all this stuff with Perfmatters, like you're going to want to have that on. But that's all you do is you check it on and APO is running. I do recommend you still have a plugin on your site, like as far as like clearing Cloudflare cache and stuff like that. But yeah, that's it. And then they add the $5 to your billing when you enable this. They walk you through that, but that's about it.
Okay, but if you don't have that checked on and you're not paying Cloudflare $5 a month, then you're probably not using the edge caching.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless you're on one of those managed hosts that already has it for you.
Okay.
So maybe it's better to, if you don't know, check with your host. If you're with like Kinsta, Rocket.net, any of those, they already have that running. So check with them first if you're not sure. And then if they don't have it and you have a Cloudflare account, go check to see if you have it on. If you don't, then you can walk through just adding that and then go from there.
Excellent. Perfect. That was very helpful. Thank you for showing us that.
Okay, so let's go to... Okay, so now I just have a few quick examples. This is using that Speed Vitals TTFB tool. Really cool for if you're needing to test TTFB across the globe. So we can see here we're running a test in America and Europe, and this is without edge cache on, to be fair. So we can see if I was just using normal page cache, basically the degradation of TTFB as you get further and further and further away.
Oh.
So, and then the next slide, we go even further away. So if we go to Asia, my site's in North America, we go all the way over to Asia or Africa, we can see that the TTFB is just really, really high. And remember, this is lab data, not real user data. So imagine what the real user data might be for that, not the lab data instantly right there. So if I was serving clients all over the world, that's a problem. That's not going to work. So that's what edge cache fixes. So if I add edge cache, I have examples here. I didn't do the last one, but I did do the first one here. You can see it's consistent across the board. It'll just be green, low, everywhere. And that's because we're using Cloudflare Edge Cache, and they're literally just serving up pretty much the entire site, including the HTML, from all the different Cloudflare locations. And they have every location you can think of now. So
yeah, not one of those are over 100. So
yeah, good. I think one did. Yeah, there was 185 right there. And sometimes
okay.
you'll see a little fluctuations, but that's more sometimes with Cloudflare's routing and their latency and stuff like that. But yeah, if you have edge cache on, you'll pretty much see consistent across the board.
Yeah, that's a great illustration of the difference of it off and on.
Yeah. And definitely check out that tool from Speed Vitals. If you're trying to optimize with edge cache, it's a great way to test it after you turn it on. And also remember the 3-test rule.
Yeah.
If you use this rule the first time, you might see higher scores. Okay. So the next one is reducing HTML doc size. Or the DOM. You'll see the DOM warnings, PageSpeed Insights. So remember, TTFB is primarily about backend server resources, cache, distance, stuff that we've already gone over. However, a large HTML page or DOM with lots of DOM elements means that more data needs to be transferred. Oh, yeah, we're going over the DOM size right now. So
yeah, this one came in a little while ago and I started. So
right.
I thought I'd bring it up here while you were on the subject.
The main thread one we'll actually go over in a different video. But for this one, hopefully this will help him a little bit with the DOM stuff. So basically, a bigger HTML page needs more data needs to be transferred to the server. This can potentially slow down the processing time of the server, which indirectly increases TTFB. So while some might not say that like the HTML size is even part of the TTFB process, it does impact it. And again, yeah, you'll see that avoid excessive DOM size warning page speed insights. So here I set up 2 examples. It's just a fresh WordPress install on the left, using InstaWP. Shout out again. On the site 2, I use their Faker WP thing, which is great for just adding dummy data. I love that integration. I just added 600 WordPress comments, and we can see comparing just site 1 to site 2. We can see one has great, it's DOM elements, 163, it's in the green. This other one now has 15,000 DOM elements, and you can see the JS execution time just shot through the roof because the DOM is bigger. So we now know that the DOM is bigger. What does that do? So we're going to now go look at what happened to the page size. So just adding all those comments, the page size went from 14 kilobytes to 345 kilobytes for the HTML page size. So huge increase. So now by the DOM getting bigger, the HTML page size increasing, how is that actually impacting TTFB? So if we look at it, TTFB is 571. And then we look at the last one with those bigger page size, bigger DOM elements, 1.5 seconds. So just by having more DOM elements and increasing page size, the TTFB went up 162.7%.
I'm dealing with this right now with a client that I inherited who has a fairly old site that was built on WP Bakery, and it's got a lot of animations and some video backgrounds and a lot of things going on. And if you inspect that page, you don't have to run tests on it to know there's a lot of extra elements in this HTML that I don't see when I'm building with generate blocks. And we're running into this exact issue. It's just like the page size is so huge. I don't know that there's some things I can go in there and tweak and fake and turn some toggles on and help with things out, but I can't just reduce the size of the page without rebuilding it, essentially.
Yeah. And for some of those clients, because we run into a lot of those things too, sometimes based on how big it is, sometimes you have to do a site rebuild. Like that's the answer. Like sometimes you just have to be honest and you need to rebuild this. But how can we reduce the HTML doc size? So here's a few pointers. And actually, we will have a video on total blocking time, which will actually dive into this even a little deeper. But I did want to throw in a few points here because this does have an indirect impact on TTFB. So obvious solution, length of your pages. I see a lot of people missing this though. I like to mention this. So like say you have a WooCommerce site. On a homepage, you have those rows of like popular products, most sold products, all that stuff. Instead of adding 5 rows of products, maybe cut that back down to 2 or 3. That'll reduce the DOM size and number of elements. And if you're confused about DOM, like don't even pay attention to the word the DOM, I guess the size. So every HTML element that you add is just going to add a DOM element. So just think every element you add is going to increase the DOM. So every widget, every row, every little HTML block of code is adding to the DOM, basically. That's the easiest way to understand it. So yeah, just reducing, look through your page. If you'd be like, okay, I could do without this extra row, get rid of it, that'll reduce the DOM. So just be more mindful maybe when you're building sites about that stuff. Then like what you were saying, lightweight themes and solutions coded with performance in mind. This is automatically just going to reduce in fewer DOM elements, DOM element depth, which is like, if you think of a menu, an HTML menu, if you look at the code, you'll see there's like, the LI elements, there's depth to a DOM that goes down as you trigger those. So that's also important. But again, I recommend Generate Press 1 now, Cadence and Cadence blocks, bricks. Those are just a few. There's other good things out there, but those are the 3 that I personally recommend. You will literally have less problems with HTML page size, DOM size warnings, just right off the bat. So it just makes everything easier.
Yeah, and I know, like the hosting question, a lot of people want to ask, well, what about my page builder? Well, and there's an infinite number of those out there. inspect your page. I know I've seen. I'll throw one under the bus, and I know they're working on making improvements here, and I don't want to just be a hater, but I know with Elementor, at least in the past when we've done these tests, you drop a headline block onto a blank page, and it actually stacks like 3 divs and then a headline block in there, right? And that's not a big deal if you're just talking about a blank page with one headline on it. You're not going to have performance issues here. But if you think about an actual created page, if every time you add one element, it actually adds 3, you're tripling the size of your DOM just by using a builder. Now, they may have made vast improvements to that, so maybe I shouldn't throw them under the bus. But you can easily see this just by like inspecting your page and seeing when you add one thing to your page, how many things actually get added, right? And I think that's been a trick of page builders for a long time, is to make these things a little bit easier and quicker to build out. They have to do a bunch of tricks in the background that actually add to your DOM. So using some of these that are very conscious of the performance stuff does make a huge difference there.
Yeah, and while I don't recommend using Elementor, we work with a lot of Elementor clients. I would say probably 80% of our tickets all have Elementor running.
Mm-hmm.
That's how popular it is. So we see that a lot, but I will give them a shout out. Like you said, they are actually going back and trying to fix some of these problems. Unlike some of other solutions I've seen out there, like Elementor does care about fixing some of these problems. Now, the problem is with the page builder, there's only so much you can fix too. So that's why, again, like I've been pushing GeneratePress. Pushing is maybe not the right word, but I've been recommending GeneratePress for I think over 8 years now. And so, I mean, anybody that knows me knows I use GeneratePress for all my stuff. I love it. I think it's the best solution out there by far. And again, you'll just have fewer problems. And I do have folks, if you want to reach out to me or look on our Perfmatters site checklist, that there's folks out there that literally just migrate people from these other solutions to GeneratePress. Kyle is one of them. Give a shout out to Kyle. And then WP Boosters is another one. But there's folks out there, if you don't have the time but want to pay someone just to be like, I want to just get rid of this old thing and move it into GeneratePress and go forward. There's people out there that you can pay to just do that. And that they're very good at it because they've done it many, many times over.
And there's a market out there for that too, which is interesting.
Yep. WP Boosters has pretty much built their entire business model just migrating people. So, but yeah, good there. Another problem I see is don't just inline everything possible. Like what you were saying, this you just ends up with, I've seen sites with 40,000 lines of code, which just pretty much just freezes my browser at that point if I look at the source code. So a lot of these optimization plugins, have the inline CSS option, inline other stuff. That's not always the best solution to everything. Inlining does a lot of times fix page speed insight scores, but if you're inlining literally everything, that can be really bad. So just think about what you're doing with some of these things. External style sheets can be cached separately, and it's not going to be part of the TTFB essentially then. So just think through that. Same goes for SVG code. I think you mentioned, Kyle, animations. This is a common one we see all the time is people will inline the SVG animation code, and that will instantly like 10x the size of their HTML, where it would actually be better to just save that same code as an SVG image, and then you can lazy load it. Like that's the fix for that. So think there's smarter ways to do some of these things than literally just inlining everything. Another thing you can do is utilize the script manager in Perfmatters. So we have this thing called like any mode, which is kind of the more powerful mode, but it will actually allow you to disable plugins, and that includes inline CSS and JS. So if you have a plugin or something that's not running where it shouldn't be, you can use the script manager to kind of turn things on and off. And again, MU mode will tackle the inline stuff as well. And then pay attention to the number of HTML elements. I think Kyle kind of mentioned this already. Just look at how many elements you have. I was working with a client, and I had tweeted this out, the result of this, but he didn't realize he was getting spammed. So it wasn't really his fault. He just didn't realize it. And it added up to over 60,000 DOM elements on his posts. And so his page size was over 700 kilobytes. And he was like, what's happening? Like, why is everything so slow? And we tracked it down to that. And once we fixed the spam problem, that got rid of all those HTML elements. DOM element size dropped. JS execution time instantly dropped because of the DOM. And again, we'll go more into that relationship in one of those other videos with the JS and DOM stuff. But yeah, that's kind of some quick tips on reducing the DOM in HTML.
Huge. Love it. I know we have some people that have just joined us here. We are just discussing TTFB today, and we're going to dive into some of these other topics on upcoming webinars. This is a 1 of 5 in this series here. So,
yep. So increasing cache length. This is another way you can improve TTFB, or keep it low, I guess you could say. Is most hosts and cache plugins out of the box will just have short cache time. And kind of some of that I think is because as we mentioned earlier, it's annoying when cache is the problem. Like you need to clear the cache. So a lot of times they'll just have like a 24-hour cache to make sure everybody's seeing the most up-to-date thing. However, that's not a good thing for TTFB because you want people hitting cache as long as possible. You don't want it just expiring all the time. And so cranking that up to a longer duration is a must, in my opinion.
And most of the caching plugins will give you those options. A lot of times I want to say it's like set in hours. So you might have to do some math there, but
yeah. And like you said, most cache plugins, hosting providers all have this option. And it's also referred to as TTL. So you might see it called TTL instead of cache length, but they'll have some type of wording like that. I recommend 30 days usually for the cache length. If it's a blog or static site, I recommend even doing more, sometimes like a year. Like on my personal site that has just a few blog posts, I actually have a year expiration time on that cache. So,
and that doesn't mean your cache cannot be flushed for a year. It just means it's not going to automatically flush. If you have to go into the website and post a new blog post, a lot of these plugins they're intelligent enough to know that when you publish something new, go ahead and flush the cache, or they'll have something in the admin bar or a setting there where you can go in and flush the cache as needed. It's just not going to do it automatically. And I'm sure a lot of these hosting companies or plugins that do caching in here also put a 24-hour expiry because that they could probably draw a direct inference between the number of support tickets they get and how long the cache length is.
Yep. And yeah, you kind of just tackled my next point was you don't need to worry about it being too long because they'll automatically clear it for you with these days. So, yep, exactly. And any of those hosts too that have like, let's say you're not using a caching plugin. Let's say it's your host that has a server level cache, like Kinsta example. Like they have all these things built in as well to purge it when you update a page. Like same with Rocket.net, all this stuff. So you don't need to worry about setting it too long these days. Let's see. Preloading cache. So another thing you can do is preloaded cache, also referred to sometimes as warm up. Sometimes people call it different things. Because let's say you do an entire cache purge of your site. You just clear everything. Immediately, it's going to start rebuilding the cache as people hit the site or your speed testing or stuff like that. Those first visits are going to get a higher cache time, obviously. And so that could seep into your real user data, technically at some point. So,
especially if you were clearing the cache a ton, right? Because every time you do that, it has to start over essentially.
Yep. And so preloading cache, there's different ways solutions go about it, but like a popular way is to look at your WordPress sitemap file, and there's an automated process that will kind of go through your popular sitemap, popular pages, recent stuff, and it'll just run a process that puts it back into the cache automatically. And so the one downfall to that is extra server overhead too, though. So it's another crawling everything, like putting things back in cache, like it's definitely not a lightweight thing to do. Like it's definitely a heavier process. But like cache solutions like Fastest Cache, Rocket, Super Page Cache all have preload options. This can get a little trickier at hosts because a lot of hosts don't actually have this option, but I think it's mainly because of the overhead. So the plugins love to add it because it is kind of like a hack to get it back into cache right away. So it depends on what you're using. You might not be able to preload cache, or you might be able to. So
I guess if you notice your server crashed after you preloaded the cache 15 times in a row, that's why.
Yeah. And some of these do have ways you can limit like what you want to preload, like only preload, the top 10 pages that were recently, stuff like that. So to keep overload, but the reason they have those options is because this is a lightweight process. Imagine you're using Perfmatters, you made 10 tweaks and you purged the entire cache 10 times in the same day. That's having to preload 10 separate. It's a lot of extra overhead going on here. So so just be mindful of that. And then the other thing with a Cloudflare APO edge cache, the one cool thing about that is when it populates the edge cache, like let's say you hit a site in Canada. When you hit Cloudflare automatically takes that edge cache and it pushes it to the Germany Cloudflare edge cache location. So it doesn't have to wait for someone to hit it from Canada, someone to hit it from Germany to do that. Cloudflare is smart enough that it literally instantaneously pushes that cache everywhere. So in that instance, Cloudflare only has to build a cache once on their side, which is pretty cool, actually. Another thing, maybe common sense, but clear cache less often. I know this sounds maybe kind of silly, but there's some tricks that you can do as far as when you're optimizing. Obviously, you need to clear it. Times when you just have to, that's fine. But many solutions have a way to purge a single URL. So if you're just trying to fix something on one page, sometimes you might want to just try purging that one URL too, especially in like Cloudflare, and see if that fixes it instead of doing the entire site all over again. Another thing I like to do, I do this myself, is just set up a maintenance schedule, whatever works best for you, to do your plugin and theme updates. There's a lot of benefit from doing that, not just performance, but let's say you do it once a month. You go through, you update your plugins and themes, and then you do that full purge after that because there's probably quite a few things that have changed. That gives your cache length at least time to live as long as possible before doing that full purge all over again.
So we go with the push and pull, like the benefits and drawbacks to all this, right? I don't know how many people want to wait 30 days to keep everything, or want plugins 29 days out of date. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's just an example. So like,
sure, yeah.
You could do 2 weeks or 1 week, but try to stay away from that. Like you see a new update in there and you think a new shiny feature and you just update it right away. That's what I recommend staying away from. Like, because a lot of times most sites will have a plugin update every single day if you have enough plugins running. And so if you're going in there, updating to the new shiny feature right away just because you want it, even though you're maybe not using it, and then you're purging your entire site cache and doing that every day, that's a bad cycle to get into. So just get into a better cycle of like 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 month, doing your updates, purging the entire site cache. And that will hopefully keep your TTFB lower and things hitting cache longer. So, and then of course, you do also have to keep in mind that, again, that like you have your page cache with your host, and then you have cache with your CDN provider like Cloudflare. So these are two different layers of cache. So I think that's pretty much about it. Quick summary I was just going to go over again is, TTFB, huge impact on FCP, LCP, perceived performance or total load time. Get it under 800 milliseconds, but aim for 300, and hopefully you'll end up somewhere in the middle there. And because of, like Kyle brought up too, with the connection speed, they're throttling it. So they're wanting you to see kind of the worst of the worst. So that real user data will come through as better, or hopefully in the green. Hosting. Can't stress that enough. If you're paying less than a coffee for a host, you're probably doing something wrong. Server page cache is a must. Don't forget about the redirects, DNS, TLS. Speed test the final URL without that redirect in it. Keep 301 redirects in mind because those do add performance overhead. Edge cache fixes the distance problem. So, and let's see here. Oh yeah, one thing I didn't mention, but like edge cache, in my opinion, is one of the best optimization inventions of the past decade. Like that's how important and cool I think it is. So like I can't stress enough like how great edge cache is. Like when Cloudflare launched their first APO, like it was a game changer in my opinion. And now there's other plugins doing it. Automatic Cloud's doing it now too. So it definitely is a game changer. Reduce the size of the HTML doc and reduce your DOM elements. We went over that. You can preload your cache if you have a way to do that. Clear cache less often. Don't just update the plugin every day and then clear the cache every day. And then remember that it's not an official metric. So if you see your TTFB in orange or red or something, it might not necessarily be the end of the world because it's not actually an official metric. But if it is in the red, it's probably impacting your other metrics. So
I could actually touch on that real quick while we're sitting here. I'm like, I'm going to run my website through PageSpeed Insights real quick. 99, which that's worse than a 70 sometimes to be that close and still a point off. My TTFB is 1 second, so I'm gonna have to look at that because other than that, all the scores are pretty decent. So this must be one of the things. In fact, the diagnostics down here in the lab data says serve static assets with an efficient cache policy. So I'm going to guess that cache lifetime is set to something pretty small, and I might be able to fix this one fairly quickly.
Yeah, the cool thing is a lot of these that we just went through are quick fixes. Quick and fairly easy. Like some of our other videos later, like we'll be diving into a lot more complex like things and like Perfmatters and stuff. Like this stuff's all like just knowing kind of what to use, what's impacting TTFB. So like you can fix this fairly easily. Now remember, over time you got to wait too. If you flip all this on today, you're gonna have to wait for that real user data to still like kick in. But and then I just have always remember, not everything has to be perfect. You're going to probably have areas of your site that need to be bypassed for cache for certain reasons. Even on our e-commerce sites, we do. There's certain areas that are still indexed but need to be bypassed because of functional reasons. And like those are just going to have higher TTFB. So that's why you want to get your TTFB optimized as much as possible, because you might have areas that are going to swing it in the other way across your site.
What you're saying is if I'm getting a 99 right now, I probably shouldn't spend the next 3 weeks trying to get to 100.
I would not. No.
Okay. Well, I will have to, because they give you fireworks, Brian. Fireworks when you get all 100s.
I would actually fix that TTFB. I would actually spend more time on that. Because over time, that's going to actually improve your FCP and LCP across the board, which is way more important than just that one little point, which we did that. So yeah. And then I just have, sometimes aiming for perfection is a waste of time. Focus on improvements over time instead, and use whatever works best for your individual site. That's the beauty of WordPress, in my opinion. There's so many different ways to optimize sites that can also make it frustrating at times too. But again, there's a lot of different ways you can achieve the same performance.
Well, if you guys were going to screenshot something or take notes, I think this slide right here is a good one just for your quick summary of if you see TTFB problems and you listen to this, these will all be good reminders here of what things to check when it comes to that.
And yeah, I think that's it.
Excellent. Well, if you don't mind, I know we're slightly over an hour here. We already had some people have to bounce. I started 8 questions, and I was thinking maybe we could just speed run through these. You don't have to give us tons of detail.
We got time.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I'll put them on the screen here so we can all see them. Rick said, how much does TTFB affect speed in relation to different web servers like Apache, NGINX, or Litespeed?
So the server itself really won't matter that much. Like it doesn't matter if you're running NGINX, Litespeed. What matters is more the hosting provider and how they have that set up with the network. So like connection time, DNS stuff, that matters more in my opinion. And then what cache solution you're using, that matters more. So like if you're on a Litespeed server, I actually recommend using the Litespeed cache plugin. So I didn't mention that, but like Litespeed is kind of its own little thing. So on that instance, I would use the Litespeed cache plugin because it just works best with their environment. So.
Yeah, and I know, like I said, or like you mentioned earlier, I use Cloudways for a lot of my hosting, and I just have used their Breeze caching plugin because it's made by them and configurable and everything. And when you gave me a list of the caching providers you listed, that wasn't one of them. So I asked you about that, and you said probably just stick with Breeze if I'm using Cloudways because it's all connected in the back end essentially. Is that still kind of your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's still my opinion. Yeah, maybe I can go back and I'll tweak that slide before I give it to you, the PDF, because if you're, it is usually better to just use, if the provider has their own cache solution, those guys probably know their environment better than anyone. So just, if you're just using page cache, which operates very similarly across the board, it's probably better to use their stuff because like Cloudways has varnish cache, object cache, they have all these other integrations that they just have ways to purge automatically, you know? So if you already have a provider that has their own cache solution, like probably use theirs instead of one of these other recommendations.
Perfect. All right. Some of these we already covered, but I'll just go ahead and answer, or we'll answer them here really quickly. When we talked about how is that, what kind of connection is that measured on? Remember that all that data, the lab data is being tested on a purposefully slowed down connection, a throttled connection in there to give you an idea of what this looks like kind of on the average for the real world. What you see in the actual pass and fail scores at the top of that screen when you run those tests is real world data. So does that kind of summarize that fairly decently, Brian?
Yep.
Excellent. How does Cloudflare affect TTFB, which we did get to an answer here. So I think your general recommendation on this is if you're going to use all the edge caching stuff, Cloudflare could be an excellent answer for improving your TTFB. But if you're not going to use that edge caching, maybe it's not the best answer here for performance-wise anyways.
Yeah, just realize that it will add to your TTFB, probably around 100 to 300 milliseconds just from the overhead, from their security-related things. Like that's what the edge cache fixes. It's not a workaround, but it fixes that problem. So like, yeah, so if you're going to use Cloudflare, I say always use edge cache. That's my recommendation.
Excellent. This is another one we answered. Does the page builder impact TTFB? So we talked about the DOM size, the actual document size of your HTML there. So if you're using something that tends to be a builder that adds a lot of what we call bloat to your page, maybe unnecessary elements, that could slow down your TTFB. Whereas if you're using something a little bit more lightweight, you might end up with a better score there. Is that all correct again?
Yep.
Sweet. Trying to give you a breather here and talk a second for you. What do you recommend for e-commerce sites? So this question actually came in as we were talking about caching, I believe. So does that change your recommendations on caching solutions if they're running an e-commerce site?
No, pretty much doesn't at all. So managed hosts, e-commerce sites, like we have our Perfmatters site and NovaShare site, which are e-commerce sites. So you're going to have areas on that site that are automatically not cached for certain reasons, like checkout page, sometimes a pricing page, like there's different areas, account page, and all these caching plugins like Fastest Cache, Rocket, Breeze, all of them pretty much these days have these areas just automatically excluded. Like, so you don't really need to worry about like caching the wrong area. Same with the managed host providers with their cache. But it doesn't really change your recommendation. You always should have a caching plugin, whether it's a blog site, e-commerce site, regardless.
Excellent. All right. May have answered this already, but can we get a presentation of the slides afterwards? We are going to share those afterwards. So I'll make sure to put that this same URL, you're looking at the YouTube video right now. This is where it will live permanently, but I'll come back and update this description with a link to those slides. And then if you're signed up for our newsletter, I'll make sure to put this replay in the newsletter next week in case you forget. There will be a reminder next Friday for you as well. All right, and then lastly here, we have a question about hosting, about shared hosting. Some are marketing as premium shared hosting, the hostinger business or cloud startup. Should I avoid them and go with the real dedicated managed hosting?
Well, the easy answer would go with the real dedicated managed hosting. But in my opinion, there's no such thing as premium shared hosting. That doesn't even make sense to me. The word shared,
that's called marketing, Brian.
Yeah, that is good marketing. Although I think Hostinger they just posted their first profits for the first time. They're now profitable, I think. So they're doing quite well. Yeah, I just recommend staying away from shared hosting altogether. Go with the real dedicated managed hosting if that's in your budget. It's going to be way better. Or go with another host that's one of the managed ones that we recommended. So absolutely. If it has shared in the name, stay away. That's just the easiest recommendation I can make.
Yeah, I think there's I mean, we could do a whole webinar on this too, but
yeah, this is a little bigger topic.
There's just straight up shared hosting, which I think most of us are aware of. Then there's managed hosting with some of these premium providers like you listed earlier. And then there's I think you even listed when you're talking about hosting stuff like Cloudways kind of being a hybrid in between the two, because you can grab one hosting account, one server, and stick as many websites as you can fit on it. So is that essentially, do you want to do more work self-managing this? Essentially, is that the difference you see between that and one of the premium ones?
Yeah. And technically, so say you go with a dedicated one where you're going to do a lot more of the work, you might be able to actually achieve better performance than one of the managed hosting providers, because the managed ones have their set of rules and sometimes you can't tweak everything. They want to have it work a certain way. Dedicated, you can you get access to all the resources you pay for. That's the benefit to real dedicated servers. But it takes more work too. So, but with shared, the term shared just means that it's kind of like I have my ISP provider, and sometimes they will throttle you in the evenings when there's more people using the cable,
right?
For internet. And so you have to know that that's what the hosts are doing too. If there's more, they're sharing CPUs, sharing memory. So your site could be slower one day than the next day. So if that's concerning to you, you shouldn't be using shared hosting.
If you just sat through an hour and 22 minutes of this webinar because you're that focused on improving your performance, you should probably stop using the shared hosting, I think.
If you attended a webinar on TTFB, I would invest at least in a better host at this point.
There you go. Fair enough. Well, sweet. Well, this was awesome, Brian. This was I think a great introduction to the series. I know we're going to get into the weeds a lot more on some of these upcoming episodes. The next one is going to be on LCP. Do you want to give us maybe a tease on what we're going to be talking about there?
So LCP is largest contentful paint. So what is basically causing the longest point of time for the page to actually paint? The easiest thing to give us a quick example is probably most times the featured image on a blog post will be the LCP element, because that's the biggest thing where it's taking time to paint. And we'll be diving into some crazy stuff. Again, these other ones will be more technical, but I'll dumb it down as easy as possible with steps. We'll dive into more plugin settings too in these other ones, whereas this one we were kind of just in this keynote the whole time. But we'll go into Perfmatters. We'll be here's preloading an image. What's the impact of preloading on LCP? And all sorts of different things we can do to improve the LCP times. So pretty much we'll work our way down. If you go to PageSpeed Insights and there's a filter for LCP, we're going to go through each and every warning impacting LCP and see what you can do to fix it, basically, is what we're going to do.
Excellent. That's great. And I'll have the registration page open for that probably in a week or two. We have that penciled in for July 12th. So it'll be another Friday, same time of day of whatever it is for you right now. I don't have all the registration for that open yet, just in case we do have to, if there's any reason we have to move that around, but you can pencil that in. I feel pretty confident that's when it'll be. We tried to space these out a little bit. I think all of them are about 3 or 4 weeks apart, so we can have time to digest. I know, like, as you can see by Brian's notes there, he did a lot of research on this, and I think the other ones take even more. So we're going to give him a little bit of break in between these.
Yeah, and it would be, if anyone doesn't like this format, like ping me on Twitter or X now, I guess. But I plan on doing probably the Keynote format going forward as well. But again, we'll be bouncing it back and forth between Keynote and like plugins, doing different tweaks here and there.
Excellent. It might even be worth it. I know we can make this available as a PDF or something, but maybe we could just turn this whole thing into a blog post along with this video so people can kind of reference those things quickly. We'll talk about the logistics of it. We don't have to do that in front of everybody. Sure. Excellent. Well, Brian, I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. I'm super excited about the next episodes we have coming, and I know this can be super helpful to everybody. You're out there in Arizona, so stay cool as much as you can. I know there's a bunch of fires out there too, so stay safe from all that. The world is crazy.
Yep.
You're either in Florida and underwater or in Arizona and on fire.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's true. Fortunately, the fire hasn't reached the city yet, so I think I'm okay. But yeah, if you venture outside of the city, there's a lot of fires right now.
Yeah. And I'm sure it just feels like fire when you walk outside and it's 115 degrees. So
that too. Yeah. So I have reached the fire, I guess.
I got out of Texas and I haven't opened the front door to the oven since, and it's been pretty nice.
I like the heat though, but I'm weird. You're like that. Everybody that lives in Arizona wants to move away from here, and everybody that's moved here loves the heat. So it's kind of weird. But.
Well, sweet. Well, I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate all you guys watching. If you would hit a like on this as you close your browser, I would really appreciate that. If you're not subscribed to the Admin Bars channel, we do lots of fun WordPress things here, so join us. All right, Brian, we'll do this again soon, and we'll talk to everybody next time we see you. All right. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.